What happens when the one road that holds an entire army together suddenly becomes a death trap? For the first time in this war, the question is no longer if Ukraine will cut Russia's land bridge to Crimea. The question is when. And the answer to that question is terrifying. The Kremlin, more than anything else, has in the last 3 years. There is a quiet panic spreading through the Russian command right now. It is not on the state television broadcasts. You will not see it in the staged meetings with the defense minister. It lives in the intercepted calls. It lives in the frantic redeployment orders. It lives in the internal Russian military blogs that are suddenly screaming about betrayal. This video is going to show you exactly why Russia's most vital supply line is on the verge of collapse. But before we move forward, take a moment and press the like button. It tells the algorithm that this story matters, and it helps bring these truths to a much wider audience. And if you want to see more deep analysis that goes beyond the headlines, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now, let's look at the one geographical feature that could decide the entire outcome of this war. To understand the scale of the crisis Moscow is facing, you have to visualize a map of the Black Sea coast. Think of the Ukrainian mainland. Now look at the Crimean Peninsula. For Russia, holding Crimea is the crown jewel of their entire imperial project. It is the symbolic heart of their military revival. But holding Crimea is a logistical nightmare unless you control the land that connects it to Russia. When the full-scale invasion began, Russian forces stormed out of Crimea and pushed northeast and east. It is not just a road, it is the jugular vein of Russia's southern army. For a long time, this corridor was relatively stable. Russia fortified it so heavily that it looked like a scar on the earth from space. We are talking about the densest minefields, layers of concrete dragon's teeth, pre-built kill zones where artillery is zeroed in with mathematical precision, underground command posts protected by meters of reinforced concrete. Russia looked at this corridor and declared it an iron fortress. They believed that no army could drive a spear through it without bleeding out. But Ukraine is not trying to drive a spear through it. Ukraine is burning down the entire fortress from the inside out, piece by piece. And to see how, you have to look at the weapons and the tactics that have changed the game in the first months of 2026. The first thing you need to understand is the geographic pressure. Ukraine is not simply fighting on one axis. If you listen to Russian military planners, the word you hear repeated over and over is dispersion. They are terrified of dispersion. Ukraine has committed to a multi-axis campaign. Imagine a boxer being hit not just in the face, but in both kidneys and the liver simultaneously. Any Russian soldier west of that cutoff point in Kherson and Crimea suddenly finds themselves living on borrowed time with no fuel and no food. But the main thrust is only one problem for the Russian general staff. There's a second axis of attack oriented along the Huliai direction. This is a deeper, sweeping blow that threatens to cut the logistics lines feeding the western flank. It forces Russia to panic and move units laterally. Moving a brigade laterally is one of the most dangerous things you can do. When you move columns of vehicles during the day, they get spotted by reconnaissance drones. When you move them at night, they struggle with navigation and still die to thermal imagery. Every time Russia shifts a battalion, the western flank weakens, and vice versa. This is a trap, not a street fight. This is a game of chess, where Ukraine is taking pieces off the board by forcing Russia to run back and forth until its soldiers collapse from exhaustion. And then there is the third front, the Dnipro River line. This is where Special Operations Forces have maintained a foothold. It is an awful place to fight. It is a maze of marshes, islands, and destroyed villages, but Russia cannot ignore it. If they pull their elite airborne troops, the VDV, away from the riverbanks, Ukraine could expand the bridgehead into the back of the corridor. So, those airborne troops stay pinned. This is the way a modern army collapses. It is not always a dramatic breakthrough. Sometimes it is a slow, grinding paralysis where you are forced to watch your best units dissolve. Keep this picture of paralysis in your mind, because it sets the stage for the strike that shattered Russia's sense of safety. Before we dive deep into that strike, I need you to share this video. Send it to a friend who follows the news. Every share increases the pressure to make sure the facts of this war are not forgotten. Thank you. Now, let's go to March 7th. On that morning, the sky over occupied Donetsk lit up. But the target was not a tank column or a trench. The target was the Donetsk International Airport. That name sounds familiar, right? It was the site of a legendary battle, where Ukrainian cyborgs held the terminals for months against waves of Russian-backed stormtroopers. The old terminals are destroyed, but the massive concrete aircraft hangars still existed, and Russia saw those hangars as the perfect shield. They turned the underground bunkers and the thick concrete walls into a super factory for death. This was the home base for Russia's Shahed drone campaign. The Shahed 136 is an Iranian-designed suicide drone. It flies low, it flies slow, but it comes in swarms. Russia has used thousands of them to terrorize Ukrainian cities. to hit power plants, and to exhaust the air defense missiles. The drones were lined up, ready to launch, aimed at Ukrainian homes. Russia thought this base was untouchable. They had ringed it with S-400 air defense batteries and Panzer systems. That is a multi-billion-dollar shield. They assumed Ukraine could not hit it without losing dozens of pilots and planes. They forgot who they were fighting. Ukraine planned a synchronized strike that is already being studied by Western militaries as a blueprint for penetrating advanced air defenses. Here's how it worked. First, they launched ATACMS ballistic missiles. These weapons come screaming down from the upper atmosphere. To an S-400 operator, an incoming missile is the top threat. The radar screams alarms. The computer processing load spikes to maximum. The system focuses every electron on calculating the intercept point. It is like shining a flashlight in the guard dog's eyes. In that exact second of maximum distraction, the real killers arrived. Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles. These are stealthy, low-flying robots launched from jets flying at treetop height. While the Russian radars looked up to chase the ballistic arcs, the cruise missiles snuck in low and slid into the hangars. The Storm Shadow carries a penetrating warhead. It punches through reinforced concrete and then detonates a secondary charge inside. It turns a sealed warehouse into a pressurized oven. The hangars at Donetsk airport did not just burn, they erupted. The video footage showed massive secondary explosions blooming for hours, fuel tanks cooking off, warheads blasting holes through walls. The human machinery behind the Shahed campaign evaporated. The technical knowledge and programming expertise vanished. Russia can build a drone. They cannot easily replace a team of specialized engineers who had been running that network for years. But that was not the end of the week. Remember the paralysis trap? Ukraine is now dismantling the brain that commands the muscle. The precision guidance kits for the Iskander missiles, the radar power modules that allow the S-400 systems to track targets, the communication nodes, the electronic warfare boxes. If you want to blind an army, you burn down the factory that makes the glasses. Russia's air defense claimed they shot the missiles down. The massive column of black toxic smoke over Bryansk told a different story. The regional authorities eventually declared a day of mourning. That tells you the strike was catastrophic. A day of mourning is not declared for debris. It is declared when a city witnesses a strategic disaster. By striking the Crimea plant, Ukraine created a bottleneck in Russia's missile production that cannot be solved by money. Sanctions block the import of high-grade military semiconductors. Black market smuggling can only get you enough for hobby drones. It cannot run a sprawling military facility. Russia's partners cannot send them a spare factory either. They can send philosophical support and artillery shells, but they are terrified of secondary Western sanctions. They cannot risk sending entire industrial production lines to Russia. The missile systems being fired at cities are now a finite resource, in a very real sense. The pipeline replacing them just got cut by months, if not years. That is a conservative estimate. This was a 29% increase over February, which was already a brutal month for Russian casualties. Over the first 3 months of the year, Russia bled more than 89,000 troops out of their force structure. During that same time, they managed to recruit about 80,000 new bodies. The math is painfully simple. For 4 straight months, the losses have exceeded the new arrivals. Russia is burning the candle at both ends, but the quality of the loss is what damns them. The average age of a Russian soldier has risen significantly. The young professional contract soldiers who invaded in 2022 are buried in the fields. The officer corps is hollowed out. Russia is now sweeping prisons, pulling debtors out of courtrooms and pressuring university students to sign contracts. They call them volunteers, but when you're facing financial ruin or prison, signing a contract is a desperation move. The government has been forced to raise regional signing bonuses by 50 to 80% in some areas to find people, but even then, they are falling short. Russia set a recruitment target for the year, a massive mobilization goal. Based on the actual pace of recruiting, they are on track for a deficit of 65,000 soldiers by year end. The military is shrinking, aging, and degrading while the front line expands. This human erosion makes the tactical situation lethal. When Ukraine pushes on multiple axes, the Russian commander has to choose where to send his reserves. But if the reserves are made up of 50-year-old men with 3 weeks of training, they are not a counterattack force. They are target practice. The elite units, the naval infantry, and the airborne forces have been sucked into the meat grinder. They are being used as costly fire brigades, driving into burning villages to try and stop Ukrainian mechanized advances. Every single one of those elite soldiers killed in a defensive fight is a soldier who can never be used for an attack. The strategic offensive that Moscow planned for 2026 is dead. It is a paper army that never made it to the field. It died in the planning rooms because the units required are currently being consumed holding the route to Crimea. This creates a negative feedback loop that is destroying the Russian position. You cannot rotate forces with no fresh bodies. You cannot build a strategic armored fist because every tank you have is stuck in a ditch covered by drone surveillance. And you cannot drive the Ukrainian troops back because The fortified kill zones they are building are absolutely lethal. One of the most underrated aspects of Ukraine's current strategy is what they do after liberating territory. They do not celebrate and rest. They immediately dig in. They pour concrete. They string miles of razor wire. Ukraine has been systematically hunting Russian communication antennas. We are talking about 40 antennas destroyed in February. This is not random. This is a calculated decapitation of the nervous system. Without those antennas, artillery is blind. The drone operators lose signal. The tanks drive into kill zones blind and get picked off one by one. It is a form of sophisticated electronic and kinetic blinding that leaves the Russian soldier feeling abandoned and paralyzed. The land corridor is not just being squeezed, it is being deafened. And a deafened army is a dead army. Now, we have to talk about the geopolitical foundation. The Kremlin entered this phase believing in a myth of Western fatigue. They believed that the conflict in the Middle East would drain Western ammunition supplies and European voters would get tired. None of that happened. The Western strategic community has not fractured. The Nordic and Baltic nations have accelerated support. Enormous packages of aid have been authorized. Poland is spending a huge percentage of its GDP on defense. Germany is spending over 100 billion euros to modernize its military. Europe is rearming, not retreating. And the strike on the Iranian drone infrastructure by Western allies has cut off the cheap aerial swarm tactic. The Iranian axis of supply has been severed and bombed. Russia is increasingly fighting alone with a dismantling industrial base. They have lost the luxury of stockpiling munitions for a major breakthrough. They are living hand to mouth on the battlefield. The political narrative inside Russia is also cracking under this strain. The internal blame game is poisoning the command structure. Regional politicians and military bloggers are now openly asking dangerous questions. Why are we losing officers so fast? Why is the air defense so ineffective? Why are we sending our best men to die for a logistics route that is being severed? These questions destroy morale far faster than any bullet. When the illusion of invincibility breaks, it is replaced by vulnerability. The land bridge is not physically cut today, but you have to see the bridge for what it is now, a crumbling structure. The trucks can still roll for now, but every driver is looking up at the sky with fear. The fuel dumps are being targeted. The defensive lines are still manned, but they are manned by older men who feel abandoned by their generals. The war has entered a stage where the mathematics of attrition are openly, undeniably running against the country that started it. Russia is losing the war economically, technologically, and politically. They are losing it on the most basic human level. The soldier cowering in a foxhole is hoping the drone buzzing overhead does not have his name on it. The corridor to Crimea was supposed to be Russia's great strategic prize. It is turning into a massive, elongated grave. The moment of severing is coming, and when that final line snaps, the entire Russian position in southern Ukraine will collapse. The world will see it. The history books will mark this moment as the turning of the tide in this conflict. Listen carefully, because what you are watching is the anatomy of a strategic defeat playing out in real time. The supply route is breathing its last breaths, and Russia knows it. Thank you for reaching the end of this analysis. If you want to see a follow-up on the economic fallout, let me know in the comments. Your engagement fuels our ability to continue. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next report as we continue to monitor the front.